21st Century Entrepreneurship with Martin Piskarik.
My name is Nate Amidon. I'm CEO of Form 100 Consulting. At the core, what I think entrepreneurs would be really interested in is really the execution piece of getting things done, and how when we're executing, especially the more complicated and the more complex the domain gets, which is happening with AI, the more important alignment is, the more important communication, clarity, and then having the right processes in place. As a former military Air Force officer, that's what we did all the time. We operated in a very dynamic environment where things were changing, the enemy is changing, the conditions, and all of that is a very dynamic, multiple different services all working together. You had to stay communicated, you had to stay aligned, and if you weren't, then you weren't going to execute, and things could go sideways really fast. So I think from an entrepreneur perspective, especially when you start to scale, how you're able to stay aligned and keep the same level of efficiency while things get more dynamic, while you get a new round of funding and you go from maybe one software team building your app to 10 software teams. A lot of organizations really stumble when that happens. If you're an entrepreneur and you have a great business idea, but you can't execute on your great business idea, then it doesn't really matter. And sometimes you can execute at a small scale, and then you'll get additional funding, you'll start to get traction, and then all of a sudden that execution at a small scale, you have to do it at a much bigger scale. And it becomes much more complicated, much more dynamic. And so a lot of entrepreneurs will struggle when that happens, or even small companies when they get into the M&A space and they merge. All of a sudden they're now integrating multiple groups together, and that's a different thing than sitting in your garage building the newest app. And so how do you actually execute? And that becomes a real challenge, and it's a different skill set than just deciding if you have product market fit. It's really figuring out how do we stay efficient and how do we stay aligned. Alignment is one of the key pieces and the things that we focus on the most as an organization, because when teams are aligned, that means everybody knows what's going on. It knows why we're doing what we're doing, but it also means everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So in the military, I would do a lot of joint operations so I was a C-17 pilot. It's a large cargo plane. And as you start out being a co-pilot, and then you become an aircraft commander, and then you're running your own crew. But then you're running your own formation, and then now you're kind of running large exercises. It's kind of a similar parallel to how a company would scale. And whenever we would do these bigger exercises, we would make sure that we would know specifically what the mission was, who was on what team, who was doing what, and what their specific submissions were. And that really drove, just at a basic level, alignment. So we'll work with technology organizations or software development programs, and it's not clear who's on what team. It's not clear what they're actually doing. And when you ask them, you'll get different answers. So what we focus on is really trying to drive that alignment. And it becomes really important, because if you don't have alignment, then communication breaks down. And so communication is another key piece of execution. So you need alignment, and then you have to communicate so you can stay aligned, and because things aren't going to stay stagnant. So what your team, or in the military aspect, what my plane or my formation was doing in the larger enterprise of the exercise, may change based on the conditions. Just like if you're in a startup world, your teams, your organization, or what you think you were doing is going to pivot. And the faster you can communicate to stay aligned, the more effective you're going to be. So a lot of times communication will break down. So maybe teams are aligned, but when things change, they're not communicating effectively with each other. And so then you start drifting from alignment. And so having clear communication is really important. And from an execution standpoint, all of that's held together with process. Now, I know in the startup world, process isn't a great word, and you don't want to become a huge bureaucratic mess that slows everything down. But the right amount of process is super valuable, because you can have too much process, and that can slow down any enterprise. But you can also have too little process, and that also has the same effect of slowing down enterprise. Because the process is the glue that enables communication so you can stay aligned. And when you get those three things together, that's how you can execute. It's the same in the military, it's the same in a big organization, it's the same in a startup that's scaling. All these things they're essentially the same because they're just groups of people trying to get things done in a very dynamic world. And with AI coming out, things are getting just more and more dynamic. It seems like everybody is talking about AI, and they should, because AI is super powerful and it can add just a ton of value. But it can also cause more churn. And honestly, I think a lot of organizations aren't really reaping the potential value of AI. And the reason I think that they're struggling with AI in general is they're trying to do too much too fast, and they don't really have a process or a framework for how they're approaching it. And so as a military officer and as a veteran, we are always leaning into new capabilities that give us an edge, but we do it in a measured way because we can't not do it because we need the edge, but we also can't risk the mission or our team by getting too far over our skis. And so what we've developed at Form 100 is really a framework that's kind of in the middle of it. And so when we talk about how do we implement automation and how do we implement AI in our internal business processes, because really we're talking about execution in an organization, we want to have a few key principles that we focus on. The first one is always, hey, we should create automation to make people better. Meaning we approach it not to replace humans, but to improve humans. And so we take a people first approach because we don't want to automate people out of their job. Now maybe they get better and we need less people, and that's going to happen as things just progress. But we also need people to help us adopt it in the culture of the company. And you need people. And so coming in first with an automation strategy that says we're going to try to reduce our workforce isn't going to be super effective because you need people to do that. The second area and philosophy that we use from an AI perspective is that it has to be valuable automation. I know that sounds like common sense stuff, but it really does need to be valuable, and you have to know what valuable means. And just because you can save time on your individual step in an organization doesn't mean it's better for the system, doesn't mean it's better for the entire organization. So if you improve your step, but you make the 10 people downstream of your process, you make their lives worse and it takes more time, then you haven't made anything more efficient. So thinking about value in a way that is really in a systematic view is another area that I think organizations struggle with. The other two areas that we focus on a lot is doing it in an incremental way. So we spend a lot of time with software development, and software development, people will use an agile process. And so you need to treat every AI automation and every new initiative as its own software product, because that's really what it is. So by taking that software product and doing it in an incremental fashion, meaning finding small use cases of value, not trying to build an all-encompassing AI that does everything, but just trying to incrementally automate individual steps, then you'll get better change management, better adoption, and you'll learn from doing that. And that really brings it to the last point, which is all these AI automations need to be sustainable. And I'm not seeing a lot of people talk about how to improve sustainability when it comes to implementing AI. And what I mean by that is if you're creating an automation, it has to be dynamic enough to change with the underlying business market conditions. And if the AI isn't set up in a way to do that, then it will get stale really quick. And we also need to know when to build an automation, but also when to sunset an automation, when it becomes not valuable anymore. And as more and more automations and agents become part of our business process, we really need to be thinking about what's the governance model around how these operate in our organizations. So I think, AI is going to be critical to winning in the marketplace. And I think everyone, especially entrepreneurs, are leaning into it. But we should think about it in a way that we know can be valuable, incremental, and sustainable. So at Form 100 Consulting, we hire former military leaders, so officers and senior NCOs, people that have leadership experience, leadership training, and we like to embed them with our clients. And I think that this is really powerful because when organizations, especially in technology, when they start to scale and move fast, things really start to drift. That alignment piece becomes harder and harder. And then communication breaks down because there aren't the right processes. And it takes leadership to put all of those things together. And so when we go into a new client, and usually clients will call us because something just feels off. They're not delivering. They have continual delays with their software development releases, and it's important that those are on time. And so we really try to understand the underlying causes of why things aren't being delivered and why value isn't being produced. And it's almost always comes back to alignment. So when we go into new clients, we really like to understand and map the airspace. And we start with some of those basic things that we learned in the military. Like who's on what team? What is the actual goal? What are you building? These are kind of basic questions, but when you really get into the people doing the work, the people that are responsible for execution, it's amazing how many different answers you'll get to what are you building. And so trying to map it out and make things visual for leaders to actually understand what's going on. Have the clarity to make the right decisions. So I'll say that we're always lowering the water level so you can see where the rocks are. And we might not know how to solve that specific problem in that specific industry, in that specific context, but the leaders do. And we need to give them the right information. And so most people that are in a leadership position, whether it's an entrepreneur that started the organization, they're almost always very competent. And they're making good decisions off of bad information that turn out to be bad decisions. And so our goal is to make sure that everyone has the clarity of knowing what's going on, and that decisions made at the leadership level actually flow down and are executed at the team level. And so taking someone who's a former leader and dropping them into an organization as a embedded as a contractor or a vendor, but really shoulder to shoulder to roll up your sleeves, build the relationships, understand the context, and then drive alignment in the organization is really valuable. And that's what we specialize in. Well, we're a veteran owned and fully veteran staffed organization, which means we only hire from a pool of former military officers and senior NCOs and veterans in general. Now, we're not a nonprofit, we're a for profit organization. And we do so, but we do it because we're a for profit organization, meaning that there's value in the experience you gain in the military. And that experience is valuable in the private sector. And the more I've been doing this and the longer I've been doing this, the more convinced I am of how valuable it actually is. And as and so now the difference is when you're in the military, you're doing things that are different than what people in the private sector are doing at some level. You don't have the private sector experience. And when you get out, your resume doesn't look the same as your private sector peers because you don't have the same level of experience. Now, that makes it harder for people to get jobs. And really it's unfortunate because it is a huge untapped talent pool. Because when you get just below one layer of your exact experience and get to your foundational experience, you realize that actually a lot of military veterans have way more experience at way younger ages than most people in the private sector. And and those skills are really valuable. Now, there's the basic, like, hey, we show up to meetings on time. We do what we say we're going to do. And those types of things are important. But just the ability to operate in a dynamic environment, the ability to understand that there's times when you have to make a decision, there's times when you need to just you know salute and carry on, and knowing the difference in between those two things is really important. But the ability to just to make a decision without all the information, and that seems to be one of the most important things that the private sector really struggles with. And AI is only going to make this worse because there's going to be an enormous stream of information and options, and it's going to drive option paralysis. And I've already seen it where it becomes decisions will become more and more delayed. And you would think it would make it better because you have more information, but that's not really going to be the case. It's going to take longer. And so the people that know how to operate in a very dynamic environment, they understand they have to make a call, and even if that call is wrong, they got to make the call because they know they can pivot later. And then take ownership of the decision. Like under being comfortable saying, I'm making the call and this is what we're doing, and I'll take the hit if it goes sideways. It is a skill set that I think the military does a really good job of teaching. So, yeah, I think the military aspect is underappreciated and underutilized in the private sector, and and we're sticking with this model because it's valuable. I mean, it really is. Uh, it's worth hiring veterans and getting them in your organization, even if you're taking a risk on their air quotes experience. So the military community is a cross section of society, and there's just like every large organization, there's different levels in the organization. And so what I don't want to say is that every veteran is going to be good at every job. And so inside the veteran community, there's a whole spectrum of capabilities and skill sets. And so generally the areas where I find private sector folks are really missing out on the veteran piece is really that layer of middle leadership. And that doesn't mean it has to be managers or directors but anywhere where you need somebody that can communicate across multiple teams. So in the software development space, like a Scrum Master position is a great position for a transitioning veteran. Product owners can be a great position for a transitioning like junior military officer. Because what is a software development product owner except someone that tries to determine what we're going to do and then helps communicate how we're going to do it. And then, as you get up the senior ranks, I think it can vary depending on the organization. But generally, putting veterans into a spot where their technical expertise isn't the limiting factor. So now, obviously, if they've never been a software engineer and you need a senior software engineer, that probably wouldn't work out, right, initially. However, as AI is coming out, being an expert in things is becoming less valuable. You're able to learn these things faster. And so those foundational skills that I talked about, the ability to have grit, the ability to work hard, show up on time, know how to communicate effectively, those are just going to become exponentially more valuable. And my hope is that the private sector understands that, the military experience is a great place for you to get those skills. If you're a leader out there struggling with your technology execution, you feel like your teams aren't delivering, you feel like there's something just really off with how your program's operating, that's really where we can help. I'd recommend go to our website at form100consulting.com. There's some great resources on how we approach things. There's a lot of free material that can help you think about things differently. And then we love talking about this type of stuff, and we love helping clients. So you can reach out via the website. You can find me on LinkedIn under Nate Amidon. Yeah, I look forward to I love helping out organizations, and there's something just so nice about, there's something really, for me, really fulfilling when an organization is in a state of chaos and then they become more aligned. It makes everyone happier, and people go home happier, and they get excited to go to work. So that's what I love doing.
"21st Century Entrepreneurship" with Martin Piskarik.
Imagine a space where triumphs, trials, and tales of entrepreneurship come alive. Welcome to the 21st Century Entrepreneurship Podcast, a gold awarded journey hosted by Martin Piskarik, connecting with listeners in 95 countries and ranking in the top 0.5% of all podcasts. Join our exclusive community, elevate your perspective, and embark on the path to success.